when he comes to the arena for like his first practice, Lindy Ruff is going to have to be told not to go to KeyBank Center and to head over to the Harbor Center, which was not built the last time that he coached a Buffalo Sabres team.
Was it not?
It
It was
wasn't it
that long
24. It
ago?
was 2014, was it not?
I mean, yeah, that makes sense, but it's weird to think about, right? Like that whole construction process was done probably during when he was there. Well, do you think it went up like in construction after he left or it opened in
Perhaps.
2014?
Perhaps. But the opening of the Harbor Center was October 31st, 2014.
Do you think like he had like an office there for like that decade and a half he was around and now he just like, could I go back into this office and someone else has and he has to kick them out?
It's like Matt Ellis is in it or something.
It's like you're back to the cubicles, buddy.
Welcome to this emergency edition of the Sabre Roundtable. My name is Jonah,
I'm Christian.
And I'm JP.
and in case you've been living under a rock for the past 24 hours, the Buffalo Sabres have their head coach, and it's a familiar face. Lindy Ruff is back as the next head coach of the Buffalo Sabres.
Still feels a little surreal. Like, you know, and there's a lot of people out there who really love this move, and there's a lot of people out there that really hate this move, which makes it that much more fun and interesting to talk about.
Was there going to be an option where you didn't feel that way?
No, probably not. It's just, I don't know. I feel like a lot of the people who don't like the move, they're just a lot of, it's like the doomer crowd who just thinks everything is like a money grab at this point, and there's the other side of the fan base that, you know, thinks that this is well, the doomers also think it's like a nostalgia trip. And then, you know, but if you really look into it, it makes complete sense. And if this wasn't a guy who'd been here for 15 years, people would be like, okay, this is fine. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to how the team performs in October.
Yeah, I really do see both sides. I love the move. But I understand both sides and how people are feeling. I mean, it's good PR and it's bad PR. Like it's amazing PR for the people who want him back and who loved him. But for the people who wanted something new and maybe weren't the biggest fan of him or saw how his last few teams ended up, they're gonna hate the move. But I think it makes complete sense. I mean, I think I said that an episode or two ago that he should be clawing for it, and it just makes complete sense. So I don't know. I guess the biggest surprise it was 6 days after Kevin Adams' conference.
Well, he at his conference, he seemed like he just knew who it was going to be, or at least he had an idea. I mean, they even asked him right at the end of the conference. They're like, "Have you been in contact with Lindy Ruff at all?" And he was like, "I'm not going to get into names." And they immediately ended the entire segment at that point. And he walked off. So
I remember he did something, and I pointed it out to you guys. He like scratched like the back of his neck while he was answering. I'm like, oh, it's telltale.
psychology,
He's at least reaching out to the guy.
yeah. And I mean, I think, do you think he just was Lindy even looking? And I'd like to know how those conversations went down because, Lindy's no, spring chicken anymore. He's going to be 65.
It was interesting because a few days ago, Chad Diaministis of Expected Buffalo put out a piece on just what he'd been hearing, how Craig Berube was a top candidate for the Sabres, and at the end of his article, he put that Lindy Ruff, there hadn't been any contact between the Sabres and him, and that was, I want to say, Thursday night, maybe Friday night, and here we are on Monday. He's the next head coach. So either that was bad intel or things just moved super quick.
I
Yeah.
think Kevin was doing his due diligence with probably interviewing. I'm sure he interviewed a few others, Berube probably included, but he probably had Lindy in mind the whole time. I mean, don't forget, he coached under Lindy for a year, so he knows how Lindy coaches. He knows how he thinks. The connection is there. Um, So I don't know. It's interesting. I think maybe more people would have been happier with Berube considering he's a Stanley Cup. Um, he, he's more success, but I think Lindy might be the type of coach that we need.
Well, are you measuring success in just terms of Stanley Cups? Because Lindy Ruff is fifth all time in wins for a head coach. I mean, I would consider that to be pretty successful, but there are a good amount, and I hate this argument. There's a good amount of people out there. It's the same, and it's the same argument that um it's used in the NBA world a lot where people measure they take so much stock into an individual player's worth based on how many championships they've won. That's a team collective effort, all of that. Especially when it comes to winning championships, you know, it's not going to come down to one player. And I honestly don't think it should be a yardstick of how well a player's career goes. Um, but yeah, there's people taking so much stock in the fact that Lindy's never gotten the job done. They also fail to they also fail to realize that he's made multiple deep playoff runs and you know, sometimes things just don't work out. You just run into a really hot team. And you know, it's at a certain point it's just the way the cookie crumbles, I guess. But I don't like that argument of, you know, Berube had a Stanley Cup. Okay, so he had a year in which St. Louis probably should have been a lottery pick team, turned it around in a miracle. You'll never I bet you'll never see that for another, you know, 25 years. Just turned it around in January, halfway through the season from a basement dweller team, and they made a run to the finals and they won. What have they made the playoffs consistently before that, but what have they done before and after that in terms of deep playoff runs? They beat the Blackhawks a couple of times. But I think all that was pre-Berube. How long was he there for?
Who, Berube?
Yeah, how long was he with the Blues?
Well, he got fired earlier this year, so what, about 5 years? Look,
Yeah.
I think the argument you're making is correct about evaluating guys based on championships. It's not always fair. And I don't even think your argument is exactly a disservice to Berube because I think Berube would have been great. I think it would have been
Yeah. Yeah.
fantastic. But it's, you know, you can make the argument that Lindy Ruff carries a choking track record. But A, you know, it's a playoff choking track record. What a terrible problem to have. And B, how many coaches have been through that? I mean, Barry Trotz for the longest time was like that. John Cooper was nearly fired by the Tampa Bay Lightning before they nearly became a dynasty.
Andy Reid was like that in the NFL. He made 4 NFC championships with the Eagles and lost all 4 of them in a row. And then it took him another, what, over a decade just to get back to the Super Bowl?
So I don't put much stock into that. I'm not at a place to care about that, really. How can you complain about playoff success now
Yeah.
that a coach brings in? I mean, come on. Come on. And I think it's Ruff being brought in. It raises a discussion, and I think it's an uncomfortable discussion, at least from my point of view. And that's the Sabres are an undesirable destination, like bottom of the barrel for any head coach. And some people might turn around and say, well, why would you say that? Their core is looking really good. They're a young team. The upside is so there. And I'm like, yeah, the upside is absolutely there. This core has the potential to be a cup winner. But outside of the roster, there are red flags all over the place. We don't need to go into ownership. The 13-year playoff drought. That's an unbelievable amount of pressure. Look at how pissed off the fan base has been the last few weeks. And then you take
Last
that
few years.
last few years, and on top of that, it's just not. The franchise has carried a bad stigma. I mean, for anybody that has gone online, people are pointing to this hire as being essentially nostalgia bait. And you're going to keep seeing that until the team and Ruff proves them wrong. But that's the type of that's the view that people are going to have on this franchise. They're just cursed. They're just not a great place to be. And I think given the ownership and given the pressure, the outside pressure, why would anybody want to come here? I mean, what are the other head coaching vacancies right now? You've got New Jersey, Ottawa, probably LA.
Mm.
You might look at those rosters and be like, well, I feel more comfortable with Buffalo. And look, that might be true. But you're telling me, like, if you're Craig Berube and you have a choice between those 4 teams, why would you go to Buffalo? And I would say the only other spot that I think is more attractive is probably Ottawa, or less attractive, I should say, is probably Ottawa. But even then, you're dealing with better ownership. If you're Craig Berube and you're looking at Buffalo, Ottawa, New Jersey, and LA, Buffalo is not in the top 2, in my opinion.
No.
And think about it this way. How about if you're Craig Berube and you're looking at the playoffs right now? Sheldon Keefe is probably going to get fired if Toronto gets bounced from the first round. So he absolutely prefers that destination. I think people underrate how undesirable Buffalo really seems from the outside. I can't imagine what word of mouth is about Terry Pegula or just what the standards of the organization have been the last decade. And on top of that, Lindy Ruff is the one guy who doesn't really care about that.
Right, because he's been employed by this organization in every single decade that it's existed. And well, he lives here in the off season. He's coached here before. He's played here before. And honestly, like, if I'm looking at this from I guess an inside perspective, consider ourselves lucky to get a coach like Lindy Ruff. Like, he's coming off an 110-point season last season with the Devils. It's not his fault. Goaltending completely blew up on him this year. He was like probably less than 5% of the problem in that organization, and they were all chanting to fire him. And honestly, that's probably a big mistake on their part. I'm sure I'll eat my words at some point, but yeah, going back to your point, like, what other coaches would have wanted to be here? Berube, if I can completely see him going to Toronto, especially if they fire Keefe. Gallant, does he want to be here? Sullivan's probably not leaving Pittsburgh unless he gets fired, which I don't believe it's going to happen.
That's the other thing. Like,
Rod Brindamore's not going anywhere.
We were sort of hyping up this free agent class because, we were crossing our fingers that Brindamore and Sullivan would maybe shake loose. That didn't happen. This is it's not even that attractive of a coaching pool, really. You had Ruff, Gallant, Boudreau, Berube, Todd McClellan, and
nobody wanted him.
And then it's just a bunch Jay Woodcroft. Like, I would have liked someone like Jay Woodcroft, but he doesn't really fit what Adams is looking for. So the pool is not even that great in terms of retreads. Now you have your first timers that we could talk about, but Lindy Ruff he's at the top of the list for me besides Berube.
But I guarantee you the same people who are complaining about this Lindy Ruff hire, if they hired Seth Appert or a new guy, they'd be like, here we go again. Sabre's hiring a new guy. It's really worked out for them in the past. It's like, it's always the negativity has become so potent at this point that it's tough to hang around sometimes. I try not to, well, I wouldn't say try not to engage. I don't really respond, but it's just, how could you be so even with a 13-year playoff drought? It's like the negativity all the time, and I see the same people. It's like, don't you get exhausted yourself? Because if that was me, I'd be tired. Like,
I get it. I get the response. I get why people for anybody, if you're just following narratives, purely narratives, if you're reading headlines, then Lindy Ruff got fired from New Jersey because the team stunk this year. You would have to dig into the goaltending. You would have to dig into, hey, their advanced stats were really, really good. You would have to dig into all that. So I get if you're a more casual onlooker or you don't care to dig into numbers like we do. That's like I understand that. You don't have to watch hockey that way. So if you're just reading headlines, reading what people are saying on Twitter, I mean, geez, the entire Devils fan base hated him. Like the
Oh yeah.
entire fan base. If you're just seeing that online, then yeah, that might be a turnoff.
Bunch of casuals out there.
So I expected this, but I personally, and even in the minuscule, even in the minute moments that we've talked about Lindy Ruff possibly being head coach, and we haven't talked about it really at all. We've addressed the nostalgia thing, and I know myself personally, I'm over it. I don't see it as that.
And I'm not bothered by it because it's not it'd be a nostalgia thing if we looked into all the numbers and it showed that Lindy Ruff was bottom of the league in expected goals for his team and the team was doing terrible and they were winning in spite of him. Then I'd be like a completely different conversation. But the numbers and the facts back up that he is a coach that has adapted over the years and he consistently can bring a good product to the ice. And I don't care if he's been with the organization for how many other years before this. And you know what? And I could even uh I can understand, the feelings of doubt and, the complete lack of faith and ownership and, just thinking this is another one of those, well, we're just going to try this and, it's probably just a PR stunt. Like I understand people feeling that way, but when it comes to just being consistently negative about everything and not really looking at any of the actual facts that go into why this hiring was what I think was a good hiring, like that's not how you should be a sports fan. Like I try and look at positivity in any sort of thing that the Sabres could muster up because, it'll get you excited for the next season. And that could wear on a fan, but I guess I'm just not at that point yet. Like I want to feel, hopeful for next season. I don't want to go in just with that Debbie Downer mood because that could hang over an organization and you could see it affected the players this year. Like they said they were affected by that outside noise and them as professionals have to work on that because, you can't let that affect you because you'll get that anywhere you go. But still, it's like it's just unnecessary, unneeded noise. Sometimes it's warranted, but it being consistent all the time is exhausting and it's unwarranted.
I think what the most interesting thing about this hire is think about all of Lindy's best teams. Basically, what, 05, 06, and then what you could say the Devils, 110 points. What was so similar between both of them? They're young. They're both young teams. Like I feel like all these teams, like it's another similar built team for Lindy. So I think he knows what he needs to do. Even Paul Hamilton was saying on the air today that he's talked to him when he's been in town and how he said like this team is gonna go really far. Like this is a great team. They're gonna develop at some point. So I think out of any of the coaches, I mean, I don't know as much about Berube, but Lindy's had success with young teams before. And I think he can do it again.
Even if you go to his time in Dallas, 24-year-old Tyler Seguin, 26-year-old Jamie Benn, 23-year-old John Klingberg. That was the year they won the Central Division and they flamed out of the playoffs early, sure, but that team was very, very good. Lindy Ruff's also a figure that I think can absorb some of that pressure from the fan base, just his name being Lindy Ruff, and someone who's, he knows what the pressure's like here. And I know the last time he was here, the landscape was very different in terms of where the fan base was at mentally and where technology was at, social media, all that. Much different presence back in 2013 when he got fired. But he's someone that can take on this challenge and at least know beforehand what he's walking into.
I'm also just happy that they hired a coach that has a winning track record. At going back to you got to go all the way back to after the Sabres fired Lindy Ruff and hired or well, there's Ron Rolston and Ted Nolan in there. You really count that Dan Bilesma to find the last, head coach that had any sort of winning record before coming here because after you had Housley, this is nothing. Ralph Kruger, if you want to count the World Cup of Hockey, Team Europe, that run was electric. That was great, but no dice. And Don Granato, who came in to be a development coach, and you know he's made his way out, and hopefully Lindy gets those guys to take that next step. And I have full confidence that he could do it. He's done it with not only our teams in the past, but he's done it throughout, a changing NHL landscape where, you know, the times change from more, gritty hockey to more, run and gun. And he's done it. He did it with Dallas. He did it with New Jersey. He's coming back here. So let's keep that trend going.
Yeah, I like
Please, for the love of God.
how you brought up how he's adapted before. I mean, he's always going to be a tougher coach, but I mean, back, with the Sabres, he could probably get on the rookies as much as he wanted. No, everybody knows he didn't like Vanek. And I'm sure he'll find a player like that with us, probably Jeff Skinner. But he's adapted to how young players are treated now. I mean, he was very successful with Jack Hughes and the Devils and Luke Hughes this year, and a lot of young players that he's had a lot of success with. And Jonah already brought up Sagan, and they're young players. So I think he knows what to do, and I think he could bring this team to their next step.
Do you think?
How,
Oh,
how
go
is
ahead.
how is his power plays been in the past? Because I I can't stand to watch another bottom feeder
I
power
can
play.
pull up some data, but I don't know if you remember at the beginning of the season, the Devils were rocking like a 30% power play through like the first half of the season. Um,
I wonder what assistants he'd bring in.
See, that was a question I was gonna. That's the topic I was gonna raise because I was listening to Maintenance Day with Lance Lysowski and Joe Earden, and they always bring a good perspective, especially with the press conference that Kevin Adams gave. And but one of the topics they were talking about was about the coaching staff because what's interesting is there's still a few guys here, and Lance specifically brought up how usually the GM gets one pick, they get their guy, their one guy. Well,
I think we know who that is.
Lindy Lindy Ruff is walking into an assistant coaching room. You still got Marty Wilford around. Mike Bales is still the goalie coach, and Matt Ellis. He's not going to be a part of the staff. But if Kevin Adams also wants, let's say, Seth Appert to join the staff, okay, that's three guys now. So basically, Lindy has like one pick. But here's my thing. I think maybe you can get away with that with Lindy. I don't know if there's, who knows what the future entails? Who knows what Adams' plan is for this in terms of length? Does he see this as being his guy? Or is this, hey, 2 to 3 years, steady the ship, take that next step, and, maybe someday you'll be up here in the front office with me? Something along those lines. If you brought in a Craig Berube, a Gerard Gallant, do you think they're going to be okay with three of their assistant coaches possibly being picked for them?
Right.
Probably not. And even
Makes
Seth
sense.
Appert, because I think it's not exactly a well-kept secret. He's probably going to be the head coach after this.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
Gerard Gallant or Craig Berube are coming in and they're looking over their shoulder, and it's like, oh, okay, well, I better, this is going to be pressure for me. I got the next guy lined up right next to me. Unless these guys have the will, have the power that Ralph Kruger did to get Chris Taylor fired, they're probably not going to want Appert on the staff. But Lindy, you might be able to make a natural transition.
But this actually, when you put it that way, this actually might be good because this might be really good for not only just, the team, but just the culture of this organization as a whole. Because by doing what you're saying, you bring Lindy back in and you kind of work towards some sort of amicable agreement. Let's say you bring Seth Appert up and you right this ship and you start winning again. You flip the fans back, and then you start, because clearly what we've seen over the past year is there's definitely a disconnect between the team and the front office and Kevin Adams, because Kevin Adams obviously said they weren't meeting expectations and the players were saying they were having trouble blocking outside noise. I think the missing piece is that good coach that could really, force them to block out that outside noise by playing a better style of hockey. And then um when that time comes where Ruff wants to, step away from coaching, maybe he moves up into, like a hockey ops role with Kevin Adams, and Seth Appert, protege, moves into a head coaching job and they continue to win. And what that does as well is when you foster that good culture within that front office, that team, that fan base, you're separating yourself at least as much as you can from a bad ownership group, because the winning fixes most of that. And then when you have guys that the owner, I guess, could somewhat see is running this thing the right way, the interference level will go down, because you see it with the Bills. Like Brandon Bean is not going to let Terry Pagula have much of a say in what they're doing. He'd probably be like, "Hey Terry, you pay me to run this organization, you pay me to pick the right players, and I've proven that in the past. So let me do this. I don't need any outside input." And as an owner, you can't say anything because they've been winning. So I think it could be a really good step in the right direction for this organizational culture as a whole.
First of all, I wasn't able to say this last episode, and I want to say it now. I think your guys' hate is a little overblown for Terry. I just want to say that.
Oh
Are
no,
you
they
really
got
gonna?
to you.
Are you
I
gonna
don't.
die on this
No,
hill?
I don't want to get into it. I just
Oh.
think it's brought up way too much. My other thing is,
I don't think it's brought up enough.
no,
It's not
I
brought up
think I
enough.
think it's talked about way too much. How often does, I feel like we've talked about this with like Okposo, and teams talk about this all the time about older guys or vets who are about to retire. How often does it really happen that someone actually moves up in the organization? Like other than what Barry Trotz has done that with Nashville, like I feel like it really never happens.
I would have to
Uh,
go back and look. I mean, not
Roberto
often, but
Luongo.
I think we're looking at a pretty unique situation. This guy's a living legend here, and he's expressed desire to move up. And the GM he's working with, he used to work with. I just think there's potential for that. Like I said, I don't know. It's like
yeah,
it's a dream scenario, I guess, or the ideal scenario where he gets this franchise back on its feet and then moves on.
yep. No, I get what you're saying. So I just feel like it's talked about a lot and it doesn't really happen. But the point I want to make was I think it will be interesting to see how long they plan on having Lindy. Just because obviously 64, like let's say best case scenario, we win a cup and maybe he retires on top. Like that's still going to be what, a few years down the road. Like, can we guarantee that Seth Appert is going to stay it as an assistant that long? Like, I think he's going to get looks to be a head coach somewhere else before us, even though it might be completely ideal for Kevin Adams and probably for the Sabres for Seth Appert to be groomed by Lindy Ruff, very experienced coach, and to learn the ways, and then he'll become the predecessor. But I think it will be tough to keep him.
Well, if that's the case, you just bring Michael Pekka back, because that's what everyone else in this fan base thinks we could do. Just bring him
Yeah,
back from the New York Rangers. Why
I
not?
can't,
Make him an assistant.
I can't wait for those tweets. Oh, Pekka's coming back. Pekka's coming back. He's gonna come back and coach with his old coach. It's like he's already coaching with an old coach. People.
Hey, by the way, Chris Taylor was under Lindy Ruff at the
Oh,
Devils.
that's right. He was.
Yeah, you said that, and I look up where he was just randomly. I was like,
Forgot.
oh
Yes,
wait,
he was.
he was actually with the Devils. Yeah.
Chris Taylor has to finish his story. I feel like that's a chapter we don't talk about much. How Ralph Kruger had so much power at the time, he was literally able to get his successor fired.
How did that happen?
Was that
How did he get that
under?
much
No, that
power?
wasn't with Adams, right? Or was that?
It was. I think it was. He was Chris Taylor was one of the guys to go during the
His initial firing frenzy.
yeah, when PSE was basically killed off.
You know who Ralph Kruger was? You know who he reminds me of?
A
You ever
con
see
man.
the Simpsons episode where they build a monorail? He's the guy who sold them the crappy monorail that didn't work, that crashed and almost killed the entire town. And he just ran off with all the money. That's who Ralph Kruger is.
I would just love to be like a fly on the wall during that interview because he must have put on a generational performance of being able to woo everybody in that room.
He had to have had a
Lindy
notebook
Ruff
with him.
interviewed for that job.
He did.
Yeah.
Ralph Kruger knew about the notebook rule. He
Yeah,
cracked
he
it
knew.
open. He was like, let
Yeah.
me.
Then he
He was
made
just
up that
playing
he was a
tic-tac-toe.
wrestler. Yeah, I was a wrestler when I was younger.
He's playing tic-tac-toe in his notebook.
Wait, did you guys see Jerry Jones, his notebook picture recently?
Yes.
Yes.
It was just like scribbles.
It was all gibberish.
JP,
What was he trying to write down?
I think he was probably they were probably interviewing a player and he just wanted to act like he was taking notes. That's probably what honestly happened.
JP, I wanted to circle back to your question about the power play. So last season for the Devils, 22-23, they actually had a lower conversion rate, but their expected goals per 60 actually dropped a bit this year despite it going up, but not much. So both seasons, I think, they came in 13th both years. So top 15 power play.
If we were an average power play, we would have made the playoffs. So
It probably would have been where Detroit was, but
If Lindy
more
Ruff
regulation wins.
If Lindy Ruff had average goaltending, he probably would have made the playoffs. He'd probably still have a job. I
Yep.
won't forget that. Like he gets fired, and like what? A week later, the trade deadline comes, and New Jersey gets a new tandem. Oh my God!
Did you see there's a chart I saw going around on their I believe it was expected goals for after Lindy.
Yeah, I
Like
think
it was
like
it was
it
up
was like
and
a
down
wa-
and then right after they fired him, it just went completely down. And then it was
Fell
the
off a
very
cliff.
lowest it ever was at the end of the season.
I feel like that should be the biggest
Telltale
indicator.
sign.
Yeah, the biggest telltale sign that A, he shouldn't have been fired, and B, it was not just Brunette. And Christian and I talked a little bit about this last episode. I can't get on board with that narrative. I'm not saying he's not a great coach and that he didn't have a big influence on that 2023 Devils team, but it's Lindy Ruff's the head coach. I'm not. He didn't just. All right, Andrew, whatever you say, I'm gonna follow your lead. I don't think it was like that.
I agree.
And I
And then even
guarantee-
if it was working so good, do you think Lindy would just get rid of it? Like, yeah, he's
Yeah,
gonna keep using that
Exactly.
system.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yep,
guarantee
yep,
if you
yep.
show that chart to any Devils fan, they'd be like, "What's expected goals?" or something like that.
You're sounding off on the fans today. Sabres and Devils fans.
He's had enough.
I don't know, man.
He wants.
I've had enough of casual fans. All right.
Let him
I make
bask in the
hey
nostalgia.
I make bad takes, and we're gonna get to that over the summer when we pull the receipts from earlier this season with our predictions.
I mean,
I
no
make
one had
bad
good
takes,
takes.
but I own up to my takes. All right. There are people out there that will just stick by what they said, but I don't live my life that way.
So, is there anything else we really need to cover? I mean, it's a good day. Hey, 2 podcasts in a row that were fun. How about that?
It's great.
How long has it been since we have been juiced to record twice in a row?
Way too long. I want to give a shout out to the Kachina, the Arizona
We
Coyotes.
haven't even talked about that.
I feel terrible for them, for their fans, that they had to somehow have worse ownership than us. That was a joke. But I feel for them, and it's just I couldn't imagine losing the Sabres. It'd be a huge part of my life that's gone, and I I can't wait until hockey's back in the desert because it works. It does. But it starts from having an arena and having a place to play because there are some diehards out there, and I my heart goes out to them.
So I think that's a good place to leave off on. We have the entire summer to talk about implications, who Lindy Ruff is going to hire, what the roster is going to be shaped like, what the potential scenarios are for next season. I just we just needed to talk today. This is obviously a big day. The head coach is set in stone. Like JP said, 6 days after Granado was fired, it was not a very long search, but Kevin Adams seemingly had his guy, and here we are. Lindy Ruff is back. So I think that's going to do it for this one. We'll probably talk to you guys sometime later this week, where I think we're officially going to bookend the season, look at some of our past takes, talk a little bit about the NHL playoffs, and just the wider NHL, which we've ignored for a little while to focus on this team. So until next time, I think that's going to do it. If you want to follow us on Twitter, follow us at the Sabre Report, follow us on Instagram at the Sabre Report, follow us on TikTok, subscribe to us on YouTube, go give our friends over at the Buffalo Sports Talk podcast a listen. The draft is this week. Until next time, here's to Lindy Ruff's return. Go Sabres.
Go Sabres. Go
Go
Sabres. Sorry.
Sabres.